Good afternoon, everyone. This is Melissa Thomas with Florida National News coming to you with your Thursday edition of the FNN Politics and Power Series. So welcome to the show. And today we will be interviewing State Attorney candidate Ryan Williams, who is running for State Attorney for the 9th Judicial Circuit. So for those of you who may not be familiar with Attorney Ryan Williams or Prosecutor Ryan Williams, here's a brief bio on him and a nice quick photo collage so you can have a look at him before we go live with the interview. And here's a brief bio on him. He is someone that's actually from Florida. He is from Winter Garden, actually. He currently lives in Winter Garden. And actually, he grew up in Winter Park. He was born in Winter Park, moved to Claremont over in Lake County, which, fun fact, I used to live there. So very beautiful place. And, he met his future wife, Stacy, in the 3rd grade. So they go way back. He attended South Lake High School, which is a little deeper into Lake County. It's in Groveland, where he received more than 10 varsity letters in soccer, track, and cross country. And you guys will hear over the course of the interview, this is someone who performs at a high level. Like, perfectionism is his middle name, which is a plus. But he graduated as valedictorian of his class, and he finished with what was at that time the highest grade point average in the county's history, all of Lake County. Very interesting. Now, for his on the educational side, he got a scholarship at Rollins College, where he enrolled in the honors degree program there, graduated top 5 in his class. He graduated summa cum laude and was the recipient of the General Charles McCormick Reeve Award and a fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency. Now, of course, he and his wife eventually did marry. And shortly after graduating, he moved to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where he attended law school at the University of North Carolina. You will see a bit of a salute to that once we show you Mr. Williams in his home office. He does have the little pennant there, which is an awesome tribute to the school. But he and his wife returned to Orlando after law school, and he did have a job offer to work at different law firms, but he chose to turn those down and go ahead and work in the office of the state attorney for the 9th Judicial Circuit instead. It says here, he wanted to use his education to protect his community. So without further ado, I don't want to bore you guys too much with too much more details. I do want to bring in Mr. Ryan Williams. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. We've had about 16 forums as state attorney candidates, but not many opportunities to speak for more than 30 seconds. So I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. And that's why we welcome folks on our show. It's a 1 hour, so you get to express the full story. We get to give the audience the full story. So for starters, I like to kind of ask everybody that comes on the show, but how have you and your family been holding up during the pandemic health-wise? Everybody good? Everybody healthy?
Very, very blessed overall. My kids are 5 and 7, and my wife is a teacher, though she's actually a principal, just got promoted at Florida Virtual School. So thank you. So things are very busy between the campaign and her new job. And of course, we're making decisions about schools like everyone else is. But overall, nobody has gotten sick, and we're very fortunate. But thank you for asking.
Absolutely. And to that point, I did want to ask you your thoughts on the process of the school reopening and kind of the recent injunction that the teachers union recently leveled in Orange County. Just kind of give your thoughts about that.
So I have a more, not about the injunction, but a more informed version or view of what's going on, because not only is my wife a former teacher, now an administrator, she sits on the board of my kids' school. So she's one of the people, which is a charter school here in Orange County. So they're public, but there's that difference in how they operate. So she's been dealing with both sides of it. And frankly, we have decided to keep our kids home because my understanding of the science is that they still don't understand a lot of things. My elderly mother, I say elderly, she's in great shape, but she's 71. She lives with us, and we don't want to put her at risk. I mentioned my wife for a reason, because as a former teacher and as a board member, she doesn't want to put the teachers at risk.
Right.
We think it's unfair to send teachers back to school and put them at a higher risk when there are other options. I mean, that's my personal view. I understand. Look, I would love my kids to go back to school like everybody else. And I'm aware of the studies that have been done that show that it's better for them to be in that environment. But at the end of the day, I think our decision is we couldn't really justify sending teachers or asking teachers to go back and teach, knowing that there were other alternatives, even if they were less advantageous in the short term.
Got you. And, speaking of the pandemic, how has that affected your work as a prosecutor? How has that affected your ability to meet with clients and things like that?
But it's affected it a lot. So I'm a trial lawyer, and we haven't had any trials since March. We were actually scheduled to begin the Markeith Lloyd trial on May 4th of this year. That case is now more than 3 years old since Deborah Clayton was murdered, which is not unusual in capital litigation, or in murder litigation, homicide litigation for that matter. But, family members, members of the public, they want closure, and we haven't been able to do that. I'm also the lead prosecutor on the Nicole Montalvo murder down in Osceola County. They haven't waived speedy trial. We were geared up to do that in July, and the courts shut down again for a second time.
Wow.
So it's frustrating, not for me because this is my job, and though I like being involved, I feel bad for families and defendants, quite frankly, who are asking for their day in court. So that part of it has been frustrating, but I understand we've got to make it safe for jurors and court personnel and clerk staff, and we're just all trying to do the best we can.
Absolutely. And, thanks for providing that update, because, there have been folks that have been, at the very least, following the Markeith Lloyd case for sure. I didn't want to jump into the candidate stuff. We're going to take a quick commercial break, guys, in a few, but I did want to start here. Your campaign, I noticed, pushes the everyday mentality. Kind of talk about the significance of that and what that means for you. What does that look like for you?
So we work with a group who does our video stuff, who are very good. And it's interesting because we've sort of become friends, and they came up with that, not me and not my campaign manager. And they came up with it after watching me. They came over to my house, and, I get up every morning around 3:30 or 4, and I work and I run, and they showed up at 4:00, and that was their thing. And it is definitely who I am. I don't take a lot of time off, more time now that I have children than before, because me being present in their life is really important to me. But this job is taxing, and you never get a break. And what I try to tell young prosecutors that I work with and I try to train is, the next victim deserves your best effort, just like the last one. And I've tried 167 jury trials in my career, and I have not won them all or even come close. And you don't have a lot of time in this job to sit and lick your wounds and feel sorry for yourself. You just don't. Or to even, frankly, to dwell too much on the pain of the victims, because the next victim is right around the corner and you've got to be there for them. So the everyday mentality to me is a real thing. And I think it's a real thing for prosecutors, and it just happens to fit my personality, which is probably one reason that I love the job so much.
Wow. And yeah, definitely thanks for sharing that. There was something that resonated with me a moment ago where you were saying you can't necessarily dwell on the pain of the victim, or at least in the current case, because another one is right around the corner. How do you normally navigate that, like in your mind, like going from one case to the next? How do you normally kind of?
Just the way I said it. I don't allow myself to think about the past, because it doesn't help me in the future. You learn from your mistakes, right? But I can think of a specific instance where I used to try sex crimes cases, and there was a victim, and we had a week-long trial, and she was an adult by the time the case went to trial. Wow. And we lost. It was a not guilty verdict, and it was very emotional. And this is before I had kids. My wife and I were out at a coffee place the next morning, Saturday morning. And it just so happened, we'd never been there. And so happens that she was a server at the restaurant. So I see her, and she sees me, and she comes over and starts bawling. And I'm sorry if I get emotional talking about it, but like, you realize the impact that you have on
Mhm.
people's lives.
Mhm.
But I knew that come Monday, I had to be there for another victim. And
Mhm.
you really have to focus. It's like people ask me sometimes why, or how do you put up with the blood and the guts and the gore and the tragedy? And what I tell them is somebody's got to do it and somebody has to do it well.
Mhm.
And, people need us to be steady, us being prosecutors. They need us to be steady and there for them. And if you allow, not that I don't have my moments, I think as humans, we all have our moments where we just sort of break down and need a minute. But for the most part, I concentrate on the job at hand.
Mhm.
I think about how serious what I am is, how serious what I am doing is, and how much people need me, the victims need me, and defendants need me to get it right. And I work and I work through it.
Got you. Very good. And thank you for holding it together.
Sure,
Didn't mean to
sure.
put you in that direction.
No, no, it's fine. It's fine. It's part of it. People, I got to be honest, people I think that we're robots.
Mhm.
And, particularly in this climate of social justice, it's not easy we're not law enforcement officers with guns and badges, but
Right.
I am considered a law enforcement officer, and we're not perfect. And there are prosecutors who do bad things and not even make mistakes, they do bad things. But 99% of us are human,
Mhm.
and we care very deeply about the job that we do. And it's just not easy. I wish I could tell you it was, but if it was, everybody would do it, and that's not the case.
Right. Now, on that note, we will take a quick commercial break and get a little more into the candidate talk, guys. We'll, find out why Mr. Williams believes he is the best candidate and definitely a whole lot more. So be sure to stay tuned. We will be right back.
At Duke Energy, we deliver electricity and so much more, like free home energy assessments, rebates for energy-saving improvements, payment options to help you better manage your budget, and even bill credits for helping the community use less energy. So no matter what you're doing, we can help you make better energy choices every day. It's just another way we bring power to your life. How much can you save?
All right, guys, we are back with Attorney Ryan Williams, who is running for state attorney for the Ninth Judicial Circuit. Thank you again for being with us. So yeah, let's dive into more of the candidate talk. Like, what do you feel makes you the best candidate for the state attorney for the Ninth Circuit?
Well, there are four candidates, and so saying why you're the best is always tricky,
Mhm.
because there are talented people running, and I have a lot of respect for my opponents. I think I bring the unique perspective of being a prosecutor now, being passionate about it, having demonstrated principle, and wanting to be a prosecutor for the rest of my career. Um, we've talked a lot about criminal justice reform, and I'm sure we'll talk about
Mhm.
that today.
Mhm.
Uh, but my observation after 16 years of being a professional now, 14 years of being a professional now, is that character matters, and that the reasons why people do things affect how they do them, and the outcomes that they get. And you know, I feel as though in my career, when there have been times that I needed to stand up for something, I've done that,
Mhm.
even when it's unpopular. And that's really important because the state attorney has to make decisions that are going to be unpopular if he or she's going to follow the law and do the right thing in every situation, whether that means dropping a case that people think should be prosecuted or prosecuting a case that people think should be dropped, or adopting policies that are unpopular with some of the people that supported him or her.
Mhm.
And I mean, I feel like if you look at my career, particularly over the last 5 years, I don't think it's close that I'm the best prosecutor of the four. I think I think I've demonstrated over the course of my career that I'm an excellent trial lawyer, but there's a whole lot more to being a state attorney than being a trial lawyer.
Right.
Uh, so I think my passion is what sets me apart, and the challenge that I've had is to demonstrate to people that I am more than just the trial lawyer that a lot of them are familiar with.
And that's actually the perfect segue to my next question, which is you just touched on it. A state attorney does a lot more than just deal with particular trials, but a state attorney actually has the capacity to influence policy as well. So I did want to ask you, are there particular initiatives that you have in mind that you would want to create, if you're elected as state attorney?
Yes. So there are multiple criminal justice reform policy changes that need to be made, and then I will make a priority. A couple. Number one is bail reform. Cash bond in our criminal justice system has been a hot topic, justifiably so. It discriminates against those who make less money than others, poverty-stricken individuals, and in many ways, Black and brown communities. So, but as I've said before, we can't, prosecutors and the state attorney can't fix that problem by him or herself, because judges set bond. There's a bond schedule, and the whole point of bond is to make sure that people appear for their court appearance. So you can't just say, all right, well, you know what, we're not going to have monetary bond anymore. Just go, you can leave the jail and go and come back when we ask you to. Well, it's not that simple, because if it was, then everybody would do the right thing. And quite frankly, I wouldn't have a job. So,
right.
So we have to replace it with something, and that's a challenge because that's a resource issue. But I'm committed to sitting down with the county and our legislators and convincing them that we shouldn't be incarcerating people and making poverty a crime. So that's one thing. We also need to make much greater use of diversion programs. We over-incarcerate our population. Florida is has one of the highest incarceration rates in the state, in the United States, and we incarcerate more Black and brown people than almost any other state. Most of that is for nonviolent offenses. So obviously, given what I do now, trying capital cases, I'm not soft on violent crime, but nonviolent crime, nonviolent offenders, and particularly people who really never have to be in our system at all, we need to keep them out of our criminal justice system, allow them to support their families and themselves, and be productive members of society. And diversionary programs that are a true second chance. So you go through the system, you finish some courses, you complete some training, and then you have no criminal record. We need to make broader use of that, make it available to more offenses. We need to make it available to more people, even if they have a criminal history. I think you should still be eligible for certain crimes. So those are just two of the programs that I think I want to get started. In presidency terms, people talk about the first 100 days. They would be on the agenda in the first meeting I have with the management team that comes in.
Awesome. Given how long processes take, particularly in terms of legislative processes and things like that, what kind of timeline would you expect for either of those initiatives?
That is an excellent question. I'm really glad you asked it, because a lot of people think we just snap our fingers, right? And it happens. No, it does not happen automatically. So I'll start with the bail, because those are bail and diversion, because those are the two we discussed. The bail issue is a much longer timeline. As I mentioned, a lot of the funding that we're going to need is going to need to come from the county, who funded home confinement when it was in existence back then, of course. And then there was an issue, and a young man was murdered, which is why we don't have home confinement anymore. I believe we can do it effectively and safely, but that requires money to hire people to monitor people that are on pretrial release, properly monitor them. The technology necessary, including the ability to text message and send emails to people. All of that requires money. Money requires meetings. Right. I need time to not only sit down and coordinate with the county commission, the mayor, and others. We need time to convince them. So my hope would be that we could do that within 18 months. I think you have to get the judiciary involved, and I think that those first meetings would happen within the first 60 days. But to be able to accomplish something that's meaningful, I think you're looking at 18 months to 2 years. The diversion issue is a little more simple, because that is truly a state attorney policy that can be changed. But I know enough, being married 17 years, that I don't have all the answers to everything, and that other people need to have a lot of input. So I would want to make sure I invited members of the community, defense attorneys, and law enforcement to a conversation. We would put forth some proposals to those individuals in our community leaders, including faith leaders, by the way, and say, hey, what do you think about this? What are some potential downfalls that we as lawyers have not thought about? Try to partner with some community groups that are already in existence and I know are willing to help. But I think you could get a significant revision and expansion of the diversionary program within the first 6 months.
Got you. Okay. So 6 months for the diversionary program, roughly, ladies and gentlemen, roughly.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
And roughly 18 months for the bail reform.
Yes.
Awesome.
Well,
And
let me say one thing about that.
yeah,
And that if there's a will to do bail reform, the office that I lead will address the situation. And we will do everything we can to make sure that we don't incarcerate people without the proper funds to get out, that we don't discriminate against the poor, especially the working poor. But I can't do that on my own. There are too many other government bodies that have to come along. My observation is that given what's going on in the country right now is a good time to bring those people along. But I don't want people to think that I can, no matter how much I try, that the office of the state attorney can change that issue on their own, because they can't.
Gotcha. And that's a valid point to make. All right, guys, we're going to actually run a very quick clip because Attorney Williams did have a recent forum. This was with FAMU Law School, and he did speak on this topic of incarceration and probation reform, to be specific. So check out this quick clip.
The thing is, how do we reduce incarceration? One of the things we do is we get rid of, and I said get rid of, minimum mandatories for drug offenses, right?
Explain what those are.
So, and I'll use an obvious one that everybody can understand. Oxycodone. Person gets injured at work, they hurt their back, their doctor, if you've been to a doctor recently, you know they'll give you oxycodone for almost anything, though they're starting to cut back, and they get hooked on oxycodone. Then they get a prescription that belongs to their neighbor. They're driving down the road, they get pulled over, and they have a prescription bottle full. And that can cause you to go from anywhere from 3 years of prison up to 25 years or more of prison just for possessing it, because under the law, possessing is trafficking. What does incarcerating a person with no prior history who's got an addiction to drugs for 25 years do for us? And yet that's the law. And Ms. Barrow will tell you that when that's the law, we have very few options under that scenario as prosecutors. There's a bill right now in the Florida House to eliminate minimum mandatories for drug sentences. And there's a lot of bipartisan support in the Senate, though not in the House, for doing that very thing. But to me, the first obvious step that I would support as a state attorney, because I agree with Ms. Barra that the state attorneys need to stop complaining about the laws and start telling our legislators what will actually do some good, and pass this bill so that, and I'm not talking about things like heroin and fentanyl, which are dangerous and are only used by drug dealers, but things like oxycodone, hydrocodone. We need to roll back these minimum mandatories so that we don't keep incarcerating people.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure to include that, guys, because that's actually a very valid point that you were making, Ms. Williams, for sure, in terms of especially the doctors prescribing drugs like that, because as someone who's undergone surgery, I understand it. They prescribe the hydrocodone, which is a trip and a half, but that's a whole other conversation. But I did want to expound on the point you touched on both in the clip and before we played it, which is talking to legislators, talking with lawmakers to do some good, as you said in the forum. How would you, for those who are on the opposing side, how would you perhaps work with them to kind of win them to your cause, if you will? That might not be the best way to phrase that, but in a way to kind of win everyone, like make sure that is a win-win situation for the public and for those who need that reform.
Well, unfortunately, criminal justice reform has become a partisan issue with many on the right opposing it. Now, there are a lot of people on the right that support it, particularly in the last 60 days or so. But there's a lot of opposition by law enforcement agencies, their heads, and some legislators. The reason, and I think this is a really important issue in our race, I can bring a level of credibility to that conversation that some of my opponents cannot. And by that, I mean, no one is going to say from the other side that I'm being soft on crime or that I just want to let everybody out, because my record in holding violent criminals responsible prevents them from making that argument. And it's very simply that. I mean, you go to them and say, look, Bob or Jane, legislator, you know that I'm all about making sure that we hold people accountable, but this is not that. And it's having an impact on our community that is not fair and is not keeping us safe, and it's discriminating against minority communities. So I think that I am uniquely suited to have that conversation. It doesn't mean that a career criminal justice reform advocate can't have that conversation, but it does mean that people will not take it as seriously. That's my belief. It's the way I would go about it. I think that I have the support of 2 sitting state attorneys and the Florida Prosecuting Attorneys Association. For those who don't know, the FPAA is a body that lobbies and makes recommendations to the legislature, and is made up of the 20 elected state attorneys across the state of Florida, and most of them are Republican. But I feel like my work as a Democrat will, and as a prosecutor, will allow me to break through these barriers that have existed for a long time. And I'll say this too, I remember even when I was young, like being bipartisan was a good thing. Like legislators used to talk about all the bipartisan bills that they passed. And it's like, now, if you work with the other side to do something that needs to be done, you're considered an outcast and a traitor by your own party, which I just think is ludicrous. I don't understand it at all. I mean, I'm a lifetime Democrat. I voted for my first election in 2000 for Al Gore when I was 19 years old. And yet there are members of my party that have castigated me for not being democratic enough. And because I support law enforcement. And I'm just like, well, isn't the state attorney supposed to work with law enforcement officers?
Right.
I can't do my job without working with law enforcement officers.
Right.
So I feel like we've gotten to this very ugly place where people's political affiliations have prevented us from making changes that would really benefit our community. And I am a centrist Democrat. I have progressive ideas on criminal justice reform, but politically I'm centrist. And I think that allows me to work with people that other people can't. And I hope and believe that will allow me to help get some of these reforms passed.
And being a centrist makes sense. I understand exactly what you mean in terms of being castigated by folks within your own party, which I'm also befuddled by that, because you have to work with folks on the other side of the aisle in order to get anything done, because it's meant to be a checks and balances sort of thing. So both sides have to work together, or else nothing gets done. And we've seen that. We've seen how that turns out. So, thank you for that. We are going to take a quick commercial break, guys, and we're going to get into a little more conversation. So stay tuned. We have a lot more to talk about. We'll be right back.
We wanted to move back home to be closer to his family. We decided to go with pods because things were stressful enough.
We weren't sure how long we were going to need storage for, so we needed something that was flexible, and then they can deliver the container to wherever we move to.
We haven't found the perfect house yet, but we're still looking.
All right, guys, welcome back to our conversation with Prosecutor Ryan Williams, who is, of course, a candidate for state attorney for the 9th Judicial Circuit. Thank you, Mr. Williams, as always, for being here. I did want to get into a little bit of the recent conversation in terms of you being involved with the Markeith Lloyd case, of course, and State Attorney Ayala had chosen to not seek the death penalty for any cases. And obviously, then Governor Rick Scott moved the case to the 5th Circuit, and you pretty much moved with it as well. I wanted to ask you, for our audience, just kind of talk about what that process was like for you.
It was gut-wrenching. So, Miss Ayala came to me. People, if I may, I'd like to tell the story because I think it's important. I had been a decades-long prosecutor in the Ninth Circuit, had no desire to leave. I supported Jeff Ashton in the election, but when Miss Ayala got elected, I wanted the best for the office, and I gave her more than every opportunity to prove that she was ready for the office and to make sure that we were going to seek justice. And in fact, Ms. Barra was instrumental in making sure that I got a management position, because I think most people in the office recognized that I was one of the leaders in the office. Mm-hmm. And I remember it like it was yesterday when Mr. Lloyd committed his crimes. And then I was asked personally by Ms. Ayala to handle one of the cases, and I was honored to do so. Mm-hmm. But it didn't take long in a meeting for me to recognize that there was something going on that had nothing to do with the law and the facts and circumstances of this case. And the story that I've told to a few people is, Ms. Barra came to me one day and said, Ms. Ayala wants to speak to a victim of a homicide to get the other side of the argument for the death penalty. And my first thought was, well, what other side? I mean, we're the prosecutors. This is our side. What side is she on? I didn't understand that. But leaving that aside, I was uncomfortable with the idea of making a victim of homicide who was waiting for justice through the trial process established in our Constitution, to bring them in and make them, sort of microphones just for a test case. But I did it because I was concerned that if Miss Ayala didn't have this knowledge, she would make the wrong choice. So one of the survivors of a homicide her mother was murdered by a man named Juan Rosario, and this woman has become a good friend to me, almost like an aunt or a sister, and her husband the same. They came in and for 45 minutes talked about the loss of their mother. And about 2 weeks later, Miss Ayala made her decision public on the death penalty, and that she would never seek it. And I found out that a week before that meeting, she had been communicating with anti-death penalty groups in New York about rolling out her position. And this is all a matter of public record. These are emails that were recovered by me. And it was infuriating. It was infuriating because of the way that family was treated. They were treated as pawns. She knew what she was going to do, and she allowed them to come in and be emotionally vulnerable for optics. So when Governor Scott took the Markeith Lloyd case away, the way I got involved with that was Stephanie Dixon Daniels, who shot a Dixon's mother. We had a meeting with Mr. King, and I had never met Brad King before, and I expected him to come in and say, I'd give him my file and he'd say, have a nice life, and that would be that, and it was upsetting because I'd already gotten to know the Dixon Daniels family, and I'd already been to their house, but I understood the score, and I knew what was going on. We had a meeting where Miss Dixon Daniels and I and some others and Mr. King were in the meeting, and Stephanie Dixon Daniels asked Brad King, told Mr. King, we want Ryan to stay with the case. And Brad King called me the next day and said, we'd like you to do this. And what I didn't know at the time was that he had gone to the sheriff's office and OPD and asked them, hey, who do I need to help me with this? Who should I choose? And I'm told that mine was the name that was given. So it wasn't just Miss Dixon Daniels, but it was my reputation with law enforcement for being a good prosecutor. And Mr. King said something that still rings in my ears. He's like, when I agreed to do it, because the way it would work is I would stay working at the Ninth Circuit, and then he would cross swear me as basically designate me as an assistant working for him for this case only. Mm-hmm. And he said, that's going to cause you some problems in the office. And I was very naive. And I assumed that Miss Ayala would understand that I was staying with the cases not for political reasons, but because this family had trusted me, and I didn't want to leave them with new people to go through this process alone. And Mr. King was right. She did not understand. She took it very personally. She viewed my going with the case as disloyalty to her. And what I still think Miss Ayala doesn't understand is that my loyalty as a prosecutor, the oath I took, is to the Constitution of the state of Florida and the laws. It's not to a specific state attorney. And I felt like, because remember, the other thing going on here was that the governor had signed an executive order. And in Section 5 of that order, it says any elected official or other assistant state attorney shall cooperate with the appointed state attorney, Brad King. So in my mind, and not just in mine, because I actually saw legal counsel on this issue, I had been asked to cooperate, and me not helping would have put me in conflict with the order. So I agreed. And about 2 weeks later, the governor removed all the other capital cases, and Mr. King came to me and asked me if I would be willing to set up an office in Orange County on behalf of the Fifth Circuit to handle all of the cases that were removed. And I agreed, not knowing that whether we would keep them, because remember, the litigation was still going on in the Florida Supreme Court as to whether his orders were valid at the time. Mm-hmm. And I faced the very real possibility of leaving the office that I loved and never coming back and going to Lake County and prosecute cases. But, principle only means something if you abide by it when it's hard. And as hard as it was to leave, I felt like I couldn't be a part of an administration that was going to, in my view, willfully flaunt the law. So I left, and it turns out the Florida Supreme Court agreed with the governor that he did have the authority to do what he did, and I've been in Orange County. I never really left Orange County, frankly. I've been in Orange County handling these cases on behalf of the Fifth Circuit since May 12th of 2017.
Wow!
I told you that was a long story. I apologize, but
no, that was good.
I think there's a perception that I just decided for political reasons I was going to leave. It was much more complicated than that, and really tied up in my desire not to, some of the cases I had been working on for 3-4 years, and these families were my family. They are my family, and I wasn't about to just put them out in the cold.
Got you. And this is kind of a follow-up question to that. I noticed one of the other campaign slogans is justice over ego. So is this kind of what inspired that?
Yes. I will be candid and say that I viewed Miss Ayala's not just her decision, but the way that she announced it as very ego driven. Ego is not uncommon in government and leadership and elected officials, but ego is a dangerous thing when it comes to prosecutors. We have so much power and authority, and if you're doing things for the wrong reasons, you can really devastate people's lives. And I try, not that I don't have ego, okay? Because any trial lawyer has to have some self-confidence, though mine is kept well in check by my wife and family. But I try very hard to do what I think is right for the community and for victims, and make my interests subservient to those.
Got it. That makes sense. Appreciate you sharing that full story. This is the beauty of having a 1-hour show. 1 hour. Everyone gets to share the full story, so that then the audience can then hear everything and make their decisions accordingly. And that's the danger of having only bits and pieces or sound bites, because then we're making our decisions based on partial information. Yep. Which is antithetical to any attorney, because you guys do all the research in the world. So yeah, appreciate that for sure. I did want to play another clip for everyone that is watching, and this is on the topic of capital punishment. It's during the same forum, so you'll see the same background and everything, but this is Mr. Williams' stance on the death penalty. Take a look.
If everyone's not aware, there's a specific statute in Florida that defines aggravating circumstances that identify 12 specific things that have to be proven to a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. And we have to prove at least one of them in order for a person to even be eligible for the death penalty. So it is not nearly as randomized as it sounds. Now, that said, a person's life is at stake, right? And any person who has ever engaged that process as a juror, judge, prosecutor, defense counsel, or other, my experience is that all those people fully appreciate the consequences of their actions and the significance of the role that we play. But as a prosecutor, and I will tell you as the elected state attorney, I do not believe it is my role. In fact, the Florida Supreme Court has made it very clear that it is not the state attorney's role to say that he or she will never seek the death penalty in any case, because that is not an exercise of discretion at all. That is just a choice not to follow the law, just as it would be not to follow any other law. So my position on the death penalty is that it is appropriate in some circumstances if the aggravating factors are met and all the appropriate mitigation does not line up, that it needs to be sought very carefully after consultation with not just the community, but prosecutors, law enforcement, and others, but that I would never say that I would not follow a law that is on the books in the state of Florida.
Yeah, so definitely wanted to share that with our viewers as well. And I wanted to follow up on something you said in there. You mentioned that the decision needs to be considered very carefully, and that's including consulting with law enforcement and what you mentioned earlier in terms of the faith-based community as well. Now, I just wanted to ask for our audience, what would that look like? Is that something where you would kind of call private meetings, do something that's like a public forum? How would you consult with those entities before you make the decision to instill capital punishment?
Well, shame on me because I left a group out, and that's the victims, the victim of a crime. The first thing for me, and I'll just describe the process that I would. The first thing is always the law. You know, do we have, and I said it in the clip, the law only requires you to have one aggravating factor. I think that's dangerous, and I would not seek the death penalty unless there were multiple aggravating factors present. I think that's one policy change or decision that the state attorney can make to make sure that we're more careful about the cases where that punishment is sought. You speak to victims and you get their input, but it's input, it's not the final decision.
Right.
You speak to other experienced prosecutors and you get their input. I have always spoken with the lead detectives in the case to get their input. The community aspect of it is a little more troublesome. And what I was trying to get at in that clip was not so much a specific set of conversations with specific individuals, but listening to what the public had to say through the media, through forums, and through the input that is given to my office. That is easier to do conceitedly in a situation that is high profile. Now, most cases where the death penalty is ever an issue are going to be high profile, but the reason I bring that distinction up is because there's another one of the candidates who are running has made it very public that she will have a panel that includes members of the community from it. Now, she hasn't said what their role will be. In other words, do they have a veto power over the decision or whether she will make the ultimate decision? And I just don't know that, having listened to it. But the reality is that the community's involvement in that process comes as jurors. Because what people need to remember is my decision to seek the death penalty is the very first decision. In order for a death sentence to be imposed, first, we have to file that notice. There has to be a conviction of first-degree murder because that's the only crime for which the death penalty is eligible. Most people, I didn't realize that people didn't know that, but they don't. You can only get the death penalty for first-degree murder. Then a jury has to unanimously find at least one aggravating factor has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Then they have to find further that the aggravating factors outweigh all the evidence of mitigation that is presented by the defense attorneys. Right. And those are 12 members of the community, remember, that are picked not by prosecutors, but by prosecutors, the defense, and the judge with the applicable rules for the process. And then even if a jury unanimously recommends a sentence of death, the judge can still override that sentence if he or she believes it's not appropriate. They can't say if the jury says life, the judge can't give death. But if the jury says death, the judge still has the opportunity to look at everything and make the unilateral decision that there will not be a death sentence. So there are a lot of checks, and these are checks that have been put in place, like a unanimous jury. These are within the last 3 to 4 years. And they're affirmative, positive steps to make sure that we don't get it wrong, because we have gotten it wrong too often, right? I think Florida in particular has a history of wrongful convictions and people on death row who are exonerated that is entirely unacceptable. But I think that there are now processes and safeguards in place that were not before that allow me to feel comfortable with the concept of seeking it. I can still think of many cases where even if, I'll give you an example, even if there was a particularly heinous murder if our evidence was largely or primarily based on eyewitness testimony, we're not going to seek death in that case, because eyewitness testimony has been deemed too often to be unreliable, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these are the decisions, because all this comes back to, what is my view, for purposes of your show, of course, what is my view of my role as the state attorney? Well, that's a decision to not seek the death penalty based solely on eyewitness testimony. That has a major impact, because there aren't a lot of other state attorneys that are making that decision. But I think it's the right one and the appropriate one, given our history of getting it wrong.
Got you. And thank you for sharing that, for sure. All right, guys, we're going to take another quick commercial break, and we're going to start to transition into what you guys already know as my kind of view into the person, not just the candidate. We always get the meat and potatoes out of the way first, but we will talk a little bit more about Prosecutor Ryan Williams, the husband and the dad, like the person. All right, so stay tuned. We're going to come right back.
At Taco John's, you can expect one thing: so good. As in quality ingredients used in tacos and burritos made just for you. Every single bite.
So good.
Expect nothing less at Taco John's.
All right, guys, we are back. You guys already know, anytime you see that commercial, it is literally grabbing the drink of water, wiping your nose super quick. But Mr. Williams, I did want to get a little more into, transition a little more into how the work affects you as the human being, as a person. And given the cases that you have prosecuted, you've dealt with some serious cases, your capital punishment, things dealing with sex crimes, child abuse, child neglect, child molestation, things like that. How do you normally draw the line or compartmentalize the work from leaching over into your home life with your family?
I'm not always successful with that, and let me see if I can explain what I mean. You cannot. It's impossible to not bring it home. Now, the nature of what I do and the nature of the person that I am means that when I go to bed and I'm in the midst of a significant case or cases, which is, I would say, 350 days of the year, those are often the last thoughts on my mind. And it's usually the first set of thoughts when I wake up. Now, I am careful about coming in the back door and trying to flip a switch so that I'm there for my children, because I work long hours, and my pledge to myself and to them is that when I'm there, I'm there. But if a victim's mother calls you at 8 o'clock and it's dinner, you get up. I mean, what I have said, and maybe I hope it's not my own justification for it in my mind, I hope it's valid, is that, I've been given an opportunity to serve my community doing something very important. And it is truly an opportunity and my pleasure to do it. And by doing that, my hope is that my children will see that public service and sacrifice are an affirmative good, and that they decide to do that too. You sort of alluded to it in the lead-in. I left, probably at this point, hundreds of thousands of dollars on the table with another career, and I don't regret it or think twice about it at all. I have everything I need, but more importantly, I can look myself in the mirror when I go home, knowing that what I'm doing every day is important. And it's important to me that my children know that. It would be harder for me, frankly, if my absence until 8 o'clock at night was for something that was more money related as opposed to justice. So the way I justify it in my mind, right or wrong, is that they're going to see me doing something important, and they're already starting to understand the significance of what I do and the outcomes, and that'll spur them to go and try to do the same thing. So I'm not just trying to help my community now, but trying to raise good citizens who hopefully will do better than I do, frankly.
Makes sense. And thank you for being candid about that, in terms of sometimes the work does kind of bleed over. Right. And because being an attorney is pretty much as close to 24 hours as possible. Like, as you know, obviously
Yeah.
it's up to the attorney to choose when and how often the work kind of interferes with the family time. But yeah, there's always that, victims calling you, or clients, or even sometimes your office needing something, needing your help. So thank you for being transparent about that. Appreciate
Sure.
it. In terms of like what has inspired you to get into law in the first place, and what keeps you going, is there a particular previous case that got you inspired to get into law school, or even present day, is there a particular case or outcome that keeps you going?
So in hindsight, as a 39-year-old guy who'll turn 40 here in the next few months, I became a prosecutor, not a lawyer, but I became a prosecutor because of my father. And some people know this and others don't. My father's actually he's in state prison now. He was in federal prison for nearly a decade for stealing money from his employer, a lot of money from his employer. I didn't know about any of that until I was already a prosecutor.
Mm-hmm.
But I went to law school in 2003, and I did see that my father was, I thought, making more money, turns out stealing it. I saw the way that money changed him, and he was just not a very nice person. He wasn't nice to my mother. He wasn't nice to the people around him. And I didn't want to be that person. And I know now that a large part of my decision-making to go and be a public servant was a direct reaction to the person that he became. So I wish I had a more inspirational answer for you, but the reality is that there's a part of me that feels the need to make up for his sins. Now, once I got involved in the job and started to see the impact I could have with victims, that has taken over, and that's what drives me. You ask about a specific case, and there are so many that I could tell you about, and so many family members and friends of family members that have my personal cell phone, But the one that I'll mention is the Osceola County case with Everett Miller, who murdered Officer Baxter and Sergeant Sam Howard in 2017, which is still ongoing. But I have developed such a relationship with the Kissimmee Police Department and the officers and the community and Sadia Baxter and her family and her parents, that, whatever the sentence was, as long as I convicted Mr. Miller, I was going to feel good about that work. They were murdered on a Friday night, and the case was assigned to us. On late Saturday, my phone started getting text messages. I went to first appearance on Sunday, and I was at the Kissimmee Police Department Monday morning. And what I didn't appreciate then that I do now is that, because I was so focused, you talked about how do I go from victim to victim? Well, I was so focused on my job and making sure that I didn't mess up and that we had what we needed, that to a large extent, I wasn't appreciative of the fact that the men and women that I was meeting with were investigating the murder of their friend, right? So I remember looking back on that, and I look back on it now, and I realized that their heroism was even greater than I thought. And if they can do that, then I can certainly do my part to make sure that we get the right outcome in cases.
Awesome. And that's actually a great transition. Very quickly before I make the transition, though, the campaign website does note that you've been named by the Ninth Judicial Circuit a champion of justice twice, which is a rare honor. Only, I believe, 3 other prosecutors have had that opportunity.
Right.
Yeah. So talk about that experience.
Well, the first time was 2009. I was a younger prosecutor, and I tried 31 felony trials in a calendar year. And people don't know what the context, a good civil lawyer will do 2 or 3 trials per year. Mm-hmm. And I did 31. I just so happened to be in front of a judge who was very hardworking, and people didn't want to take responsibility for what they were doing. So I said, okay, well, let's do it. And that was the first time. The second time was right before I left. I tried a case with a woman who who gave birth to her son in a toilet and left him, and he ended up passing away. So it was manslaughter of a child. And when I say left, that was before I left the office the first time in 2011. And it was a very hard case, and I took it on, and the office, or the people that were in the office at that time, recognized it. So it's a huge honor, and I'm grateful for the experiences that I've had over my 13 years.
Amazing. Yeah, appreciate you sharing that. And you were, kind of to that point, I did want to ask you, kind of along those lines of, finding more about you as a person. Is there, aside from the case you shared, was there a case that had a greater impact on you in terms of, on a transformational level, that you already perform at a high level anyway, but is there a case that pushed you to become an even better prosecutor? Yes, there is. And the speed with which it came to mind tells me that I'm right. So in 2013, I think it was 2013, I was co-counsel with Linda Drane Burdick, who was one of the Casey Anthony prosecutors, if people want to go way back and remember that, a guy named Jason Rodriguez. And for those who don't remember, in 2000, I want to say 2007, maybe 2008, he was the individual who shot up the Gateway Center in downtown Orlando. That was back before mass shootings, before we glossed over them because they happened so often. It was a major deal. And we tried that case together, and his defense was that he was insane. And the defense had 6 experts that said he was insane, and we had none. All of the experts said he was insane, but for those, to make it clear, the jury makes that decision. So an expert can testify that in their expert opinion, a person is mentally insane and therefore not responsible for their criminal actions. But the jury makes that decision as to insanity or sanity. And we thoroughly believed, as I do now today, that at the time he committed this crime, that he was sane. And I remember sitting, it was a week and a half trial. Judge Belvin Perry presided over it. It was one of his last high-profile trials before his retirement. And we were sitting in Miss Jane Burdick's conference room. She was the chief assistant at the time. And I remember being so scared because I wanted to ask to do the closing argument. And I didn't know what she would say. And Linda's my mentor, and I wasn't sure she would let me. And she allowed me to do it. And I did it. And I think it was probably still the best closing I've ever done as a prosecutor. And it gave me the confidence that I think I needed to go forward and do some of the more serious cases that I've done over the last 6 or 7 years. So it was transformational. Every victim and every story has put an imprint on my heart and my mind and conscience. But as far as a prosecutor and being a prosecutor, that was the case that I think catapulted me forward to be the lawyer and to be what I think will be an excellent leader if I'm ever given the chance. Awesome. We're going to take one last commercial break, guys, as we start to wrap up the show, but we will be right back with one last important question from Mr. Williams. Stay tuned.
Mercury agents everywhere are saving people hundreds and are also there to help save the day.
That was fast. You covered.
Thanks, agents.
Watch out!
That's my car!
Don't worry. We're here to help.
For savings and service above the rest, you can count on Mercury. We're on a mission to save you money.
Mercury. And we are back wrapping up with State Attorney candidate Ryan Williams. So lastly, and you touched on this before, so I wanted to make sure to end the show with this question. Given the current climate having to do with social justice and in the wake of George Floyd's death, like what do you feel is the most effective action steps that people can take right now to create change? The only thing I would correct you on is George Floyd's murder, because he was murdered. He wasn't just killed. Right. I think people need to continue doing what they're doing. I mean, it's having an impact.
and by doing what I'm doing, I mean the Black Lives Matter movement matters. They've made it matter. People protesting and making sure that they're holding their elected officials accountable has mattered. Police agencies are changing their policies. State attorneys are reevaluating the way they do things. We are still a democracy, and I think that's the best way people can go forward to make sure that they're getting the change that our community and our society deserves.
Awesome. Nice and quick to the point. Love that. Now, as we wrap up, is there anything that we haven't discussed? We had a good meaty discussion, but is there anything that we haven't discussed that you want our audience to know?
I hope it came through, but my experiences have been on both sides of the aisle in the courtroom. We didn't talk about it, but I've prosecuted 3 police officers, and I lost those cases, and they were some of the most painful losses that I had as a prosecutor. And given the stories I've told you, I think that probably tells you something. I'm supported by the police, but I've prosecuted law enforcement officers. I believe the death penalty is appropriate in some circumstances, but I more than understand that criminal justice reform is necessary and needed now, not later, now. And I really do believe that you have to be a pretty centered person to take on the multitasking that this job requires. And to represent everybody, because I've never had a victim ask me what party I belong to. I never had a defendant ask me what party I belong to. I think people just want fairness. And I think as much as it can be to my detriment to walk the middle of the road and to try to be fair at sometimes politically, I think that would serve this community well in the decision-making as state attorney. But I really sincerely appreciate the wide-ranging nature of the questions and the opportunity to give full stories. It's very helpful, and I hope it's helpful to the people watching.
Absolutely. And, we thank you for choosing to come on the show and share those stories for sure. So thank you for your time. We always appreciate you. We know you are a very busy man. So we definitely wish you a wonderful day as well.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
No problem. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that does it for us here at the FNN Politics and Power Series, the Thursday edition. I will be back on Tuesday with another episode, and you guys will see the lovely flyers going out for each of the different episodes and the different guests that we're going to have. It is election season, so we'll have more candidates on our shows in the upcoming episodes. In the meantime, though, if you haven't yet, be sure to like, share, subscribe, follow, all that fun stuff. You can find us at Florida National News on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And of course, our shows are always simulcast on Facebook and YouTube at the same time. And you guys know my familiar face. You will see me again later this afternoon at 5 p.m. for the evening news rundown. So in the meantime, have a great rest of your afternoon. Take care.